What type of person does that? Knowingly misrepresents themselves, a whole cultural identity to sell art. A recent study by UCLA Law School found transgender people are 4 times more likely than anyone else to experience violent victimization like assault or rape. Soon, Keisha's mailbox was full of legitimate-looking collection notices, claiming she was behind on her property tax or owed money to the IRS. That may have been 80 years ago, but many Asian Americans still often feel like outsiders. Well, since the start of the pandemic, almost every large city in the country has reported an increase in the number of hate crimes against Asian Americans. So there are still no Black-owned dispensaries in the city of Seattle. And this is after 2 years of this task force in place. Do you call that a failure?
Yes.
Did this thought ever cross your mind that, Ollie's so young, he doesn't know what he's talking about? We shouldn't listen to him. Well, this 3,000 square foot facility will offer mental health, substance abuse, and primary care health services for up to 5,000 people. Tokatai, or Toki, has been fighting health problems for years. The Lummi tribe has been keeping watch over her in Florida. They consider her water family. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the president signed an order authorizing the immediate removal and incarceration of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans. Late Senator George Fleming served in the State House for an impressive 22 years, creating programs around affordable housing and equality that we all still benefit from today. Some of those include supporting minority-owned businesses, educating your children about the history of race in this country, and learning about the diverse cultures and communities that make up the United States. State data shows only 31% of Black families in Washington own a home. On the other hand, the white homeownership rate is more than double that. We found Tansy had beat the odds more than once, just a year before the crash. What would you say that they missed out on with you?
Someone who really cares about people.
That disparity adds up. A recent study by the Brookings Institute found the appraisal differences amounted to roughly $48,000 per home. Is it fair to say that within the agency itself, you've never felt discriminated against or kind of othered because of the color of your skin?
Not othered because of the color of my skin.
Lights, camera, action! Do you have like one of those like paper things that's like, that goes, foot?
I do actually.
Quiet on the set.
Action!
Action! When is breakfast getting ready?
That's about it.
In the Clark home, kitchen conversations sizzle in life lessons. Handed down from father to son.
Generational wealth is property or money that you pass down for generations to come.
Even at just 10 years old, Jackson knows.
Okay.
Dreams are free, but wealth takes work. The first step, setting down roots. It's been 4 years since the Clarks bought this Columbia City home.
The homes are selling for over $1 million.
I'll go rinse this off.
Okay.
But while the Clarks were renovating,
Put in a new kitchen.
a home appraiser sent by their mortgage company told them the value of their home had gone down.
My agent asked me, how was the appraisal? I was like, it came in really low. He's like, what was it, 800, 900,000? And I'm like, no, it was in the sixes.
$670,000 to be exact.
It was quite amazing to have appraisal that low in this neighborhood.
Earlier this year, Seattle real estate prices hit record highs. So Joe's appraisal seemed questionably low. According to Zillow data, the typical home value in Joe's neighborhood this spring was over $900,000.
I just want to make sure that we get the fair market value for the home.
So Joe staged an experiment. He scheduled a second appraisal and asked his white neighbor, Marta Ewell, to be his stand-in.
The objective was to see if you had a person that was not someone of color in the house, change the amount that he got for the appraisal to see if there was some kind of bias there.
Here we have the African art. I took these down as well.
Joe began the process of what he calls whitewashing his home.
This one here is a picture of my grandparents. It's a picture of my daughter at Christmas time. I took them down for the second appraisal.
And this time, when the new appraiser came weeks later, they saw Marta's white face instead of Joe's. The second appraisal came back over $300,000 higher than the first one.
We got the lower price and the neighbor got a higher price than what the house is worth.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
that's a bad thing for us.
Yeah.
I was mad that we had to go through that in order to get him an appraisal that was in line with what the rest of the neighborhood has.
Because it is part of our systematic racism that we have here in America.
We took a closer look into the differences between the two appraisals to find out how they could be so far apart.
It's taken away our generational wealth.
We know appraisals are largely based on what similar homes in the area have sold for, but
there's no set standard of what that is. Where they draw those lines differ.
and that can be a problem. Dr. Junia Howell is an urban sociologist and race scholar who studies home appraisal disparities across the country.
Am I surprised by this case? I've seen a lot of them. They're not an anomaly.
Take a look at Joe's first low appraisal from April. To assess the value, the appraiser chose comparable or similar homes that had sold up to 2 miles away for around $600,000 over the previous 6 months. Now look at Joe's second appraisal. It took into account some homes nearby sold for more than $1 million, including the home right next door to Joe's. Using that critical context to compare, the second appraisal was $300,000 higher.
Homes in communities of color are worth 70% less on average when holding everything else constant as homes in white neighborhoods. It's really insane.
That disparity adds up. A recent study by the Brookings Institute found the appraisal differences amounted to roughly $48,000 per home, or $156 billion cumulatively in majority black neighborhoods.
Because our black and brown families' homes are often devalued, they're often taken away from us.
Joe and his family are navigating a system that is deeply rooted in documented racist rhetoric. Appraisal manuals from the 1930s all the way to the 70s had perpetuated the belief that race was linked to value. Look at this manual from 1946. They ranked, in their words, Negroes and Mexicans at the bottom of this list of who brings value to a neighborhood. At the top, white Europeans.
That's racist and historically deeply problematic and contemporarily affecting real people's lives in ways that we can collectively push against and say we want and we demand better.
Such discrimination became illegal under the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But while the manuals may have changed, the diversity of the people determining home values hasn't. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, 96.5% of appraisers are still white.
We have to have those conversations about race that most other white families do not have to have.
He wants me to be successful in life.
We're fighting for the next generation.
For Joe, that means not worrying if the color of his skin will impact the value of what he can pass down to his kids.
So I wouldn't have to struggle or minimize those struggles as a black man in America.
Nice.
Several states and Congress are now considering legislation that would deal with these appraisal disparities. So far, Washington not on that list. If you feel like you've received a biased home appraisal, we have information about where you can report it. Text the word HOME to 206-448-4545. For Facing Race, I'm PJRandhawa.
911.
I need the police here right now at Lake Isabella. They're taking us to Derek's body. I'm really scared.
A family's plea for help.
Now, get cops out here now, please, now, before somebody's killed again.
Help that would come too late.
God damn it!
Those who knew and loved 27-year-old Derek Wiley are still stunned at his brutal murder.
He was just a funny kid.
Derek's foster mom, May Lynn, raised Derek and his brother Taylor.
He's the only one of my kids that ever asked me to be his mom. And I still remember the look on his face when he asked me to be his mom. And I touched his cheek. I said, yeah, let's work on that.
Derek struggled with addiction and was no stranger to local police. He would routinely disappear at times, but when his family hadn't heard from him in weeks, they decided to go to police and file a missing persons report. Police initially did not take the report, saying there wasn't enough information and Derek was an adult.
But I wasn't surprised by it because I know it's a systemic issue for our people.
Statistics show Native men make up 75% of all Indigenous homicide victims.
Our men They're missing and murdered too. It seems like they keep being just left out of the conversation.
They're always talked about in the deficit. It's also asking, well, were they drinking? Are they an alcoholic? Are they a drug user?
Abigail Echohawk is with the Washington State Task Force for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and People.
It is a common story for police departments to not take the missing persons reports of Native people.
That's why our people have become experts at finding our own.
With no police support, that's exactly what Derek's family did. They launched their own search.
This is the house right here.
His brother Taylor started by tracking down the last people who saw Derek before he disappeared.
What about you, man? You all right?
Get up. I'm straight.
What's going on?
His cousins, Jordan and Jero Affo.
My name is Jero Affo.
Seen here on police body camera video during an unrelated disturbance call weeks prior.
Everything just happened so fast.
Taylor went to their home, hoping to find clues on where his brother was. Maybe they knew something important. Instead, he says he got a confession about the worst possible outcome.
I just asked him, I was like, you know, where do you want me to go? I was like, where is he? And then he gripped my hand and he said, I killed Derek. I killed him. And as everything just kind of went numb.
Shaken, Taylor went to the Shelton Police Department for help, where he gave them this statement detailing Jero's confession.
He's like, I just choked him. I said, he's for sure not alive. No, he's not alive, man. He's not alive. I know he's not alive. I'm sitting here looking at the eyes of somebody who just took my brother's life, you know?
Derek's family say they begged Shelton PD for help in recovering his body and arresting his confessed killer. But that help was slow to come. Shelton police say it's because the crime scene wasn't in their jurisdiction.
Once we got that information that they were going there, we reached out to Mason County Sheriff's Office and said, hey, this is the information that we have. We immediately notified them, but it's their jurisdiction.
On their own again, the family continued their search to find their brother by convincing Jordan Affo to drive them to Derek. Jordan took the family to Lake Isabella State Park.
Jordan gets out and he had his head down and I was like, let's go find him.
Where he led them to Derek's dismembered remains.
How could you do this? What is wrong with you?
Taylor's grief at this moment is captured on audio recorded by the family.
I can't believe this.
I know this stuff.
I can't see Derek, man.
That's why I said we should wait for the cops. You butchered him.
The family's cries reflect a sobering, sad reality for many Indigenous families.
I know that that is pain and that has been amplified as a result of the lack of resources, of the way that her family was dismissed, of the way that she has continued to struggle to get justice for her son.
We tried to get somebody to come out here with us.
I wish you guys would have waited for law enforcement to get there before we did this.
But then it might not would have happened.
Got 5 officers and 1 canine. That'll be us tracking it.
Roughly 2 hours after Jero's confession.
I can't see the body. He's somewhere underneath these logs. They hit him in the little, water area.
Body camera video shows police finally arriving.
Well, we're not really looking or waiting for the crime lab to get here, but he's in pieces out here.
Jordan and Jero Affo were arrested that night.
Because she's praying up and he's praying down, right?
These days, Malin's grief has a physical form.
Morning prayers for our missing and murdered is one of the stone sculptures that we just had installed.
Stone carvings she created while grieving Derek now occupy a very public space in downtown Seattle.
You know, that rock was born 15 million years ago. And that rock knew that my son was going to be murdered. And it knew it was going to be part of my healing process. And it knew it was going to be a voice for our people.
Spin it this way. I want the woman's face facing me.
Her voice is now a part of the state task force for missing and murdered Indigenous women and people.
That way the Thunderbird goes through the trees.
Pushing for more police accountability so no other family has to suffer like hers.
And it's going to take the people to uphold justice. The people to say, no, we want accountability and we want it now.
For Facing Race, I'm PJRandhawa. If we're lucky, our earliest moments in this world are documented.
Oh,
This is cute too.
Printed on paper.
This was first birthday.
And saved.
They're both wearing Tupperware on their head.
A reminder of just how much things can change.
In my mind, I knew we brought home Ainsley Marie. That's what I knew.
At the age of 14, a change they didn't see coming.
We would get emails from his school to Oleander Hearts. And we were like, well, Oleander, it's like, who's Oleander? It's like, it's Ainsley.
Ainsley Marie. But Ainsley's time was up.
He kind of squatted down in front of us and he just started crying. And Kathy said, are you trying to tell us that you're trans? And he nodded yes. And the first words out of his mouth is like, will you stop loving me?
I was looking up shelters just in case that if they did like kick me out, my dad just said, come here. And I came there and we hugged. And I remember feeling this sense of just warmth. I started sobbing, I'm pretty sure.
Ainsley had chosen a new name, Oleander, or Ollie for short. How did you let go of Ainsley and accept Ollie?
I would have to say that's taken couple years to do that. I remember, being in the car, he would share that, and in my mind, I kept grieving deeply. I'm losing a daughter, and this is what I knew.
He would say, Ainsley is my dead name. He would say many times, like, Dad, does that bother you? Or Mom, does that bother you? And we're like, a little bit, but it's like we would have to just sort of just process it and get through it.
So did this thought ever cross your mind that, Ollie's so young, he doesn't know what he's talking about. We shouldn't listen to him.
Yes, when we know people in our circle of people that we know don't understand it. When my child comes to me and said, this is how I want to be addressed, that is a form of respect.
A lot of people aren't going to understand, but to have some empathy to what that person is going through, you don't know.
Ollie says he knew from an early age he wasn't meant to be in the body he was in.
I felt like I was, that God put me in a girl's body instead of a boy's. And I was really confused for like a big part of my childhood about that. I painted it when I was manic, actually.
Ollie's gender journey has taken him through dark territory.
I've gotten chased by a car full of kids who were screaming slurs at me and saying that I will never be a real man. I was at a place in my life where I didn't have anyone, anything, and it eventually just built up really badly, and that's when I planned this suicide date.
Ollie was experiencing a level of trauma that many in the transgender community face. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found 82% of transgender people have considered killing themselves, while an alarming 56% of transgender teens have attempted suicide at least once.
Depression is huge. Anxiety is off the charts with those that suffer from gender dysphoria. All comes from just not having a way to express the pain they're in.
Desperate for help, Ollie's parents admitted him to Smoky Point Behavioral Hospital in Marysville, where Director of Family Services David Vandergriff says more than 10% of underage patients identify as transgender or non-binary.
I was able to craft an inpatient curriculum for our transgender and non-conforming teens. I just hope we can get to the kids that their trust has been shattered.
Vandergrift explains the program treats mental health issues first, but also works to foster understanding and support around a child's trans identity with their parents. Yet acceptance isn't as widespread as many hope. According to a 2021 Pew Research Center survey, about 3 in 10 U.S. adults, or 32%, say greater acceptance of transgender people is a bad thing for society.
So I've got my records up there, and I've got letters from my friends from the psych ward.
Ollie spent several weeks at Smoky Point, and he and his parents are now part of their outpatient program.
Just to see him be, authentically him has been actually really amazing. We've lost Ainsley, but we've gained Ollie.
Looking back at my younger photos, I really just want to give the younger me a hug and just tell them everything's going to be all right.
Our cedar itself, when it's ready to carve, it will give itself to us.
In her Shelton studio, art is a language that speaks to Andrea Wilbur-Saigo.
It's always been told we didn't have a written language, but this is it.
Each nudge, each nick, a dialect.
It's all of our history, art in every one of those art pieces.
From fashion runways to fleece blankets, for decades, corporate America has plastered Native American art and design all over their products. But consumers may not know that very little of that mass-produced work is done by real Native artists, like Andrea.
I've been beat out by quite a few non-Native artists for good jobs. I would have to say they get better prices than we do.
In 1990, Congress created the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. Under the law, if you're representing or selling your work as Native and it's not, you're committing a federal crime. Instead, you have to be honest and say the work is Native inspired or Native style.
This is a law that does not have the teeth that it should have to protect the legitimate Indian arts and crafts industry.
Seattle-based Indigenous rights lawyer Gabe Galinda says in 2022, the act is outdated and lacks accountability. What enforcement is in the act?
It appears that's what's missing, but there has to be some process by which the question is being asked. Are you Indigenous? Is your art Indigenous? And if you say you are and you say it is, can you please show us the proof?
The penalties for misrepresenting Native art are steep, a $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. But it's not enough to stop everyone. That's Louis Anthony Rath, aka Tony Rath on Instagram, creating work federal investigators say he illegally passed off as authentic at places like Pike Place Market. Prosecutors have charged him with violating the Indian Arts and Crafts Act.
These acts operate to displace Indigenous artists from their craft, their livelihood, and from the economy that they deserve to have a place in.
Ripping off Native American artwork is a multi-million-dollar business. Take a look at some of these knockoffs confiscated by investigators. In 2016, law enforcement seizures in New Mexico and California uncovered $35 million in counterfeit art. And it's a crime that has an international reach. The U.S. Department of Justice recently charged 8 people with smuggling in this jewelry that appeared to be Native American, but the items were actually knockoffs smuggled in from the Philippines. What type of person does that? Knowingly misrepresents themselves, a whole cultural identity to sell art. Who does that?
I think people think it's an easy way just to make some money. This whole store is about Native people who are inspired and are creating this beautiful art.
The CEO of the company 8th Generation, Colleen Echohawk, says she didn't know it, but even here at a shop dedicated to Native American art, they sold a counterfeit item. So we did find one of the men that was charged with violating the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. He did sell here several years ago. We found on his Instagram page, he mentioned this store. Were you aware of that?
I was made aware of that. And it was because of that instance that we started collecting tribal identification and asked people to show us, their enrollment cards in their tribe so that we can ensure that the art that we are putting out there is going to go back to the Native community and see prosperity for Native people and Native artists.
But pretty much until this is done, this is where I live, is out here in the shop.
Back in Andrea Wilbur-Saigo's Shelton studio, she says there's another problem with the law.
I will change this federal law in my lifetime.
If she or any other Native artist allows a non-Native person to help with the creation, under current law, that too has to be labeled Native style or inspired work. Andrea says she could really use help from her mother, who's also a carver. But since her mother is not Native, that's not possible.
Now you're telling me I have to market my work the same as any other non-Native person. We should be able to say it's Native, it's ours. It's cultural, it's spiritual, it comes from the roots that we were all born from, and nobody can clip those roots. The only thing this law does is harm Native people from succeeding.
In a few weeks, Andrea's biggest dream, her latest work, will find a permanent place in downtown Seattle.
It's Grandmother Frog. She's 21 feet.
A welcome figure that authentically speaks the unique language of this land.
It's our written history, our future, and our present. Without it, we lose a big part of our soul on where we've came from and where we're going. Yep, we haven't went anywhere. We're not going anywhere.
If you're in the market for Native American artwork, ask for proof that the piece was created by a Native artist. That could include things like the artist's biography or information about their tribal affiliation. And remember, watch out for words like Native inspired or Native style. Those pieces could be created by anyone. For Facing Race, I'm PJ Randhawa.